Hello, welcome to Happy to See Me. I'm Erika Casupanan, and this is the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. And today, I am speaking with Jeopardy champ Mattea Roach. But first, I start the episode by talking about something I was happy to see. And what I was happy to see, and it's kind of bittersweet to see, spoiler alert, I'm about to talk about me on the Traitors Canada. So if you haven't watched it yet, fast forward a few seconds, give yourself like a good 30, 45 seconds. Spoiler, okay, you've had your opportunity. Now, if you've stuck around, I'm happy to see my run on the Traitors Canada. Yes, I know it was shorter than so many people anticipated, but it was a blast. And I truthfully was excited to play the game. Obviously, there's a bit of nerves and anxiety that come with returning to reality TV. So it was a lot of fun to feel like, oh, I could be reacquainted with Twitter and with the fans in that way. And I was laughing with some of my friends where I'm like, oh, I understand the experience of people being mad that I win. And now I get to experience people being mad that I lose. So yes, first one murdered on the Traitors Canada, but it was a blast. And even though I joke about, people being angry that I won Survivor, I really did feel so much of the love and support from my short time on the Traitors Canada. So I want to thank everybody who cheered me on and who have stuck around with me since my time on Survivor. I wish I could have made it longer for all of you, but this was the hand that I was dealt. That said, let me know if you want me to answer any questions around my time on the Traitors. I know it was a short run. If people are interested, I'll do a special episode or maybe a bonus episode of Happy to See Me where I answer some of your Traitors Canada questions. Of course, again, I was only there for a short time and I'm still under my NDA, so I can only say so much. But let me know in the comments or let me know through a DM to the podcast Instagram if you would like me to answer any questions, and let's see if we can make a bonus episode happen. But thank you so much for rooting for me, even though I had a short-lived run on the Traitors. Now, forget about me being a loser because today is about a winner. I got to speak to Canadian Jeopardy champion Mattea Roach. And that is not the Canadian version of Jeopardy. Mattea was on the American version of Jeopardy and became the Canadian who has had the most success on that show. Mattea has won 23 games in the regular Jeopardy season and has since come back for the Tournament of Champions and for Jeopardy Masters. And it's so amazing every time I get to speak to somebody who has had success on a reality or competition show, especially talking to someone who is a Canadian who had success on an American show. So we talk about things like the strategy for Jeopardy, because it's not just a trivia game. We talk about how Mattea decided to focus on their mindset versus studying every little fact leading up to the show and how that was probably a decision for the best. And we talk about what life is like after you have this major success on TV that's broadcast all over the world. I got so much out of this conversation with Mattea, and I hope you will too. So if there are any Jeopardy fans in the house, this is the episode for you. So without further ado, this is Mattea Roach. I hope you enjoy it. Mattea Roach, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Canadian icon. I cannot tell you how many people were so excited when I casually mentioned we were spending this afternoon together.
That's so, I feel like it's interesting. I think Jeopardy has an interesting kind of demographic pull in terms of like many different people, including sometimes people that I'm really surprised by have watched me. And I'm like, okay, all right. I guess this show is popular. Like, that's nice to know.
Well, it's a show that everybody knows about. Everyone knows this franchise. And then there are people, I agree, you don't realize that they are the super fans and they're able to track everyone's scores and know who the champions are. And I feel like with Jeopardy, people, I think, have a surface level understanding of it where they know, okay, you answer trivia questions. But what I really found interesting through reading some of your interviews is realizing, oh, there's more strategy to Jeopardy beyond just answering the question. So not that this is a strategy podcast, but having come from a strategy show myself, I would love to understand what is the strategy of Jeopardy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a couple of layers of Jeopardy strategy. One is actually how you approach selecting clues when you're playing. So I think traditionally, if you're watching at home, most people seem to prefer this, and most contestants historically have done this. What you'll do is you'll see that the clues are divided into 6 categories in each round, and people often would start with kind of the lowest value ones, so typically the easiest, and then go down and just answer all the clues in a category. What has happened recently is that players have started switching that up. There's always been people who've gone on and not played that way. But specifically like James Holzhauer, who was an iconic player who was on originally in 2019, what he did was he would start from the bottom of the board and try and build value with all of the tougher clues. And the reason why people didn't used to do that is because, you know, if you're like a standard player, you're probably getting some information out of answering those easier questions. You're figuring out, okay, well, if that was the $200 clue, like I know that that's not going to come up again in the same category. So you're kind of ruling things out, getting a feel for things. If you know that you're a really strong player and you can build value by starting with all of the like $1,000, $2,000, that's a strategy that some people choose to employ. Another thing that people will try and do is like look for the wagering clues, right? So in Jeopardy, the first round, there's always one daily double where you have the opportunity to wager any amount of your score up to all of it. The double Jeopardy round, there's 2 of those. And basically, that's an opportunity for you to really turn the game around, for you to come from behind if you're maybe kind of on the back foot. And so if you're playing like top to bottom, you're not necessarily maximizing your likelihood of finding those clues. So some people will do like a lot of analytics of, okay, these are the sorts of categories that the writers tend to place those wagering clues in. I'm going to go for those categories and try and keep that away from my opponents and kind of get the advantage that way and maybe like make a really large wager. So that's another sort of element of strategy is looking for those, trying to find them at the right moment in the game so you can maximize your advantage. And then just like, I guess, how much you wager, right? So one thing that I find people often will ask me about, like people who kind of have that basic understanding of Jeopardy, is people get really confused, especially in Final Jeopardy, when contestants make a wager that they don't really understand, right? So sometimes, for instance, the last time that I was on the show, there were a couple of games where I was I did not win these games. I was in first place, and then a contestant was in second place, and they made a very small bet. So not enough to pass me if they were correct on final, right? And so that leads to sometimes viewers being like, okay, well, why is it do they not want to win? Like, are they throwing the game? Why are they making such a small bet? And they were right. Like, they should have there's this idea of like, you should kind of always bet as if you're going to get every question right on Final Jeopardy, which isn't necessarily true. You have to also think about what the other players are going to do. And so that's a huge element of specifically Final Jeopardy betting, especially if you're playing like in a tournament setting, if you're against other players where you've maybe seen them before. Yeah, that's kind of what I can say about it. There's like a whole lot of mind games that go into it beyond just knowing the trivia, although knowing the trivia is definitely the most important part.
Oh, for sure. I can totally relate. I feel like similar to Survivor, people think, oh, you're just foraging for food and the last one left wins. I'm like, that's not how it works.
No.
I had seen you had said that you were an exciting player because you had so many close games. So did you have a specific strategy going into it, or you were like, I just want to win the game?
So definitely, you need to just win each game, right? So when you're playing, the regular season of Jeopardy, it's basically you win until, you play until you lose. So you want to just win every game. Whatever you have to do in that context to make sure you come away with the win is going to be the right thing to do. Ideally, you want to maximize your winnings too, but the main thing is you maximize your winnings by continuing to play. Did I want to have close games? No, of course you'd rather have like a huge dominant victory because first of all, it likely means you're earning more money. But second of all, it means that the end part of the game, the Final Jeopardy wagering, getting that correct response in final is much less stressful, right? If you have a runaway game, so if you have more than twice the second place player's score, it's great if you're correct in Final Jeopardy. You can maybe make a big wager and add some money to your total. But ultimately, you're going to win the game regardless, as long as you don't wager so much that you kind of put yourself in danger. But people generally don't do that, right? So I definitely wasn't like trying to make it exciting by keeping the games close. When I was originally on the show, I basically didn't have that good of an idea of how good of a player I was. I don't have cable at home, so I'm not somebody who watches Jeopardy every day. And I kind of tried out for the show on a whim and wasn't somebody who did a lot of preparation. even when I did my final audition, I think they invite around 4,000 people to the last round of auditions every year, and then cast usually around 400 out of that 4,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's out of like 100,000 people that take the first online written test every year. So even when I got to that final audition stage, I was like, well, my odds of getting on the show are 10%. I'm not really going to work super hard at what is ultimately a 10% chance that I'm going to get on the show. It wasn't even like, oh, if I get on the show, I'm going to worry about it at that point. I just assumed I wasn't going to get on. And so what that meant is when I was doing the sort of wagering clues, whether it was Final Jeopardy, Daily Doubles, I didn't really think I was going to be able to use those as opportunities to gain a big lead, to really maximize my earnings. I kind of saw them more as like opportunities to lose money.
Yeah.
And so then you want to be conservative if that's how you're looking at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that was totally the wrong way for me to look at it because I was much better at Jeopardy than I anticipated.
Yeah.
And so when I've gone back for tournaments and things like that, I've tried to sort of, okay, make the big wager. It helps that in tournaments, it's not really your money in the same way. There's like a prize value that's associated with how far you make it, as opposed to you get the amount of dollars that, you know, your score is at the end of the game. But yeah, I think I could have been more strategic the first time out for sure.
So this was not like childhood dream for you. This was, I'm just going to try it, do the online test and see what happens.
Yeah, more or less. I had been watching the show for a long time. Like when I was in high school and I lived at home and had access to cable, it was one of those things where it's always on and it's something that you can watch with your parents. Like there's not going to be any awkward moments of like, oh, like, do I really want to watch this with my mom? Everyone can enjoy it. Everyone can play along. You can be a little bit competitive if that's the vibe in your family, which it definitely is in mine. But I wasn't like a super fan. There was kind of this black hole between 2015 when I left home and then like 2021 when I was sort of doing the casting process for going on the show, where I just like didn't really know who the great players were during that time, except for James Holtower because his run was in the actual news.
Mm-hmm.
But the other people that had been on during that time, you know, like your Buzzy Cohen, your Austin Rogers, I kind of was like, hadn't really heard of them and then only found out about them when I was doing the casting and reading more about the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there also was a period of time, and maybe you experienced this also with going on Survivor. Like, was there ever a time where Canadians were not able to apply? Like, that was a recent thing that Canadians could go on, right?
Yeah, Canadians were eligible in 2018, so I was the first person living in Canada to actually make the show.
Yeah, so with Jeopardy, it was a little different. Like, Jeopardy had accepted Canadians, I think, from the time that it began, but then there was like a period of a couple of years that coincided with when I started university where there was some sort of change in the tax law around game shows that meant that for a while Canadians couldn't go on. And I kind of thought that was never going to be reversed just because it's such like a headache for them to make it possible for us to go on the show when we're such a smaller media market. We're not a huge portion of their potential contestant pool. So because of that too, it wasn't something that I was thinking about all the time, even as a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So essentially what happened was I auditioned for the show during COVID. I was stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was around the time of Alex Trebek passing away. So the show was in the news quite a lot. And it was just really on my mind. And that was what made me think, you know what? Like, I have nothing to lose by taking the test. Like, I'll just do it and see what happens.
Since it was an experience where, okay, you have nothing to lose, you're going to take the test, do you think that relieved some of the pressure when you were actually playing?
Oh, totally. I think that a lot of people, you know, there are people who go on the show where they've auditioned for 15 or 20 years, sometimes maybe more. That's kind of the upper limit of people that I personally know. But they've auditioned for 15 or 20 years. They've been thinking about it for a long time. You know, there are people who bar trivia is something that they do every week. They maybe did Quiz Bowl. Like, it's a huge portion of what they've built their life around almost, right? That it's not just about Jeopardy, but it's about all of these other things that they do. And this is like pinnacle of what you can kind of accomplish in trivia if you're that sort of person.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's very difficult, I think, when you put so much weight on one thing to kind of relax and enjoy the moment. Whereas for me, the other thing about it too is like, you don't know who you're going to be playing against when you go to tape.
Mm-hmm.
But you are sort of watching, you know, the games that were taped maybe 2 months in advance. And at the time that I traveled to go tape, Amy Schneider, who ended up winning 40 games and is the most successful woman to have been on the show, her like 38th or 39th game was airing when I was traveling down to tape my shows. So I didn't know that her run was about to be over on television. With the way that she'd been playing, I kind of thought that there was going to be either like she was still there and she was going to be on like 70 games or something, or I figured there was going to be some sort of other long running champion because she wasn't even the first one sort of in that season. There was another guy who'd won 38 games. I just assumed I was going to run into some sort of other buzzsaw contestant and that I was just there to like enjoy myself and, you know, basically take a vacation out to California. I was like, I'm going to go to Joshua Tree after this is all over. Like, you know, if I win some money, that's great. But really, I'm here to go to the desert. So, you know, imagine my surprise when there wasn't that long running champion there. Like the returning champ that I played against had won one game. And I was like, he won one game. Maybe I can win one game too. And I just sort of relaxed into the game. And I think that was really helpful.
Oh, yeah, it definitely reduces the stakes. And who knew you were the one who was going to go on this super long run?
Yeah, I would have never guessed that at all.
I read this quote, I believe it's from an executive producer, and this blew my mind, saying, Mattea spends zero time and has spent zero time ever practicing for the show. Everything they know is from reading, sitting in front of the TV, reading newspapers, and being in front of intelligent people. So is this true? You didn't study at all?
So this is a quote. So yes, an executive producer did say that. He was quoting my mother, who is a little bit, which is hilarious. And my mom is like a little bit too, I would say, generous about like how much I was able to accomplish without studying.
As a mom should.
Yeah. I will say like she's not completely wrong in the sense of specifically the first time that I went on the show. You get about 3 weeks notice from the time that they're like, okay, we want to cast you. Like, can you come down to the time that you tape? 3 weeks is not really enough to study that much. There's a couple things that you can do. Like you can bone up on, you know, the order of the presidents or your world capitals or Shakespeare, like certain things that come up on Jeopardy a lot where it's like a very defined list of things. Those are good things to study in 3 weeks, but you're not going to get, you know, like the example I always use is my first game had a category that was all about dog breeds. Like in 3 weeks, you're not going to learn all of like the American Kennel Club's dog breeds. Like you just aren't. There's not enough time. You're not going to get to it. So what I did during those 3 weeks was mostly focus on strategy. So I looked at a bunch of old games to kind of figure out, okay, are there things that are coming up a lot that I don't know? And there were like a few clues that I got from that. And then looking up, okay, Final Jeopardy wagering, like that was what I did during that time. So it is kind of accurate to say I didn't really study that much for my first time around. Now that I've been on the show though a few more times, I definitely did prepare more to go back for Tournament of Champions and then for Masters, especially because I knew like exactly who the players were going to be. And I knew I was going to be playing a minimum of 7 games. So there was sort of like a very strong and clear incentive to prep. And then also like at this point, it's people that I know, right? So there's a sense of friendly competition of like, I like these people, but I do want to prove that I can beat them if it comes down to that. So I definitely started playing more sort of recreational trivia. I did play some practice games online with friends that I met through the show. I still didn't make like flashcards and do that kind of studying. So in that sense, it's accurate to say I didn't like study, and a lot of the knowledge did come from just being in the world. You know, watching movies, reading the news, that sort of thing. But there definitely was also some stuff that I picked up from like doing trivia specific activities.
Well, I think it's smart to prepare the strategy because at least that gets you prepared for anything, right? Because you don't know what the questions will be, but if you know how you want to respond and play it, then in my opinion, that sets you up no matter what gets thrown at you.
I think that's definitely, it's the part that's like, to me, easier to do, like the mindset stuff, right? Because it is sort of like, okay, you're narrowing it down to what's in your control. And you're right, like you don't know what the categories are going to be. You don't know, you know, on the day who's going to be faster on the buzzer. Like there's so much stuff about the experience that's completely out of your hands because it's down to, you know, what's up with the other players? Like who are you drawn to play against and in what combination? You know, like how are the categories put together? Like there was this one board when I was doing Masters that was just horrible. It was like, for me, for the other people in the game, they were like, this is great. There was a category about cars. There was a category about baseball. Like it was just all stuff that I did not really enjoy. But you have to figure out how you're going to push through that and make the best of that situation. And yeah, so the mindset stuff I think is like the most important thing and the thing that a lot of people that are going on the show for the first time don't really think about as much before they're down there.
Oh, yeah, because you don't know what it's like once you're there and the lights are on you and you're holding the buzzer. And then there are people who are probably just as smart as you side by side. You don't know how you're going to react. So I think the mindset stuff makes so much sense to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like there's no way, it's such a specific experience. Like I have not really, there are things that I've done in my life that I think prepared me for the intensity of it, but none of them were really like being at the set of Jeopardy. You know, having the lights on you, like the music that you've probably heard on your TV in the living room hundreds of times is like playing in the studio. Johnny Gilbert, the announcer, doesn't come in to work anymore. He has like a home studio where he records the contestant introductions and he says your name and where you're from and stuff. But that gets read out by one of the producers. And, you know, like your host is there, like Ken or Mayim. And it's like walking a bit into a dream. Like it's kind of liminal space vibes. And it can be super overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can imagine. When I was on Survivor and we walk into tribal council, it was the trippiest thing ever because you're like, I am both on TV, but I feel like I am in my TV and I cannot believe this host who I watched for years is now addressing me by name and asking me a question. And it can be really unsettling because no one is used to that.
Yeah. Did you find it all? Like one thing that I noticed was when I was watching my shows back on TV, like there was so much that I just did not remember because I was like not forming memories as it was happening. Because it's just like you go almost into like a fight or flight mode, not in a bad way necessarily, but I would see myself on TV responding to clues and I'd be like, I do not remember saying that. I don't know the answer here on my couch. Like, I don't know how I knew that on television. Like I find that that's such like a specific, but everyone that I know who's been on Jeopardy has had an experience like that where they're like, oh, I don't recall that part of it at all.
Yeah. I found doing challenges, I would just black out. I would just be so focused on whatever was in front of me and I would just do it. And then I'd watch it back and be like, oh, I didn't realize that I belly flopped from like a story up, but whatever.
Yeah. What I found was I would remember where I had made mistakes like that. And I would sometimes like, there were one or two games during my original run where I was really, you know, I won them, but I was not happy with how I played. And I was really dreading watching them because I was like, oh man, like this is just going to suck. I remembered every wrong response I'd given or every time that I'd kind of hesitated, but then completely forgot everything that I did well. And so I found for me, I know some people really struggle with watching themselves on TV or even listening to recordings of their voice. It's just like really grating to them. But I found my memory of it was often like much worse than it actually was when I watched it back.
That's so weird. I find that after you've been on TV, you realize that the experience is not just being in studio on the cameras. The experience is also watching yourself on TV and how weird that is. And then in your case, when you were winning all of these games, you just became like this Canadian media darling. I felt like everyone was talking about you. They were so excited about this run. What was it like for you watching it and then seeing all of these people then responding to you on TV?
So it was really funny because I taped my entire run, and this is common for almost everyone who ever goes on Jeopardy. Like the only people that this hasn't happened for, I think, are like if your run goes over the summer season break, or like Ken Jennings, because he won so many games and his run also went over the summer season break. Like he was taping episodes while his episodes were airing. But for me, like I did all of my 23 wins in like January and February in terms of taping them, and then they aired April through May. So it was interesting seeing like how early the response came in terms of media interest. Because I knew that it was going to become a big thing, partly because there'd been a couple of other big winners just before me. And so I knew that there was also the angle of me being Canadian and me being young. Like there were sort of reasons that it would get press coverage. But I was surprised by how early in the run it happened. Like I think I did an interview with The National like after my fourth game.
Wow.
And I was like, oh
they
my
believed.
God. Yeah, there's going to be 4 more weeks of this. And I was kind of like, like not dreading it per se, but I was just like, what is like, how much bigger can it really be? And then, you know, eventually there's some sort of West press coverage. And I think that was kind of the peak of it. Like in the final week was when I was doing like Good Morning America and that sort of stuff. But it's very strange, right? Because people, first of all, in my opinion, like me being on television really wasn't the news. It was kind of funny, especially in the Maritimes. It would be like practically every day. My mom would text me being like, they're talking about you on the news again. I was like, is really? Like the news. Okay. So that was kind of odd, just like becoming, I had friends texting me that they got like Apple News alerts when my final game aired, or when I went back for Tournament of Champions, we did an exhibition game, which I won. They got an Apple News alert about that. So it was just like, okay, like I am in the minds of a lot more people, I guess, than I would have thought. The other thing as well is like Jeopardy, even more so, I think, than reality competition shows, is like really, really showing you a very limited version of a person, right? So obviously, anytime someone's appearing on TV as themselves, you're getting, either what editors have decided that you want to see, or you're getting some snippet of them, but not the whole person. Jeopardy is like you're playing a game, right? So you're in a very controlled environment. You're not really engaging in that much conversation outside of your kind of one anecdote. And I think I showed probably like relatively more personality than your average player, which is part of why people responded well to me. Also part of why I had more sort of like negative responses, I think, than some people that are a little bit calmer. But even with that, it's like people did not get a complete picture whatsoever at all of what sort of person I am, or like how I normally behave outside of the context of being on a game show. And so one thing that was kind of funny is like, I was in a great mood when I was taping it because I was winning so much money, like more money than I'd ever seen before in my life. It would have been kind of ridiculous if I was not having the time of my life.
Of course.
But that's like the best mood you're ever going to see me in any context, and like not at all representative of my general vibe, I would say. Not to say that it's inauthentic, but just that it's very limited. And so that was one thing that was weird, is like when people recognize me out and about, for instance, I kind of am like, okay, they're expecting me to have a certain kind of personality that to me is like really just like a minor part of the totality of my personality. So that's been kind of interesting.
So you think that they saw you perhaps at your best because you were happy, or it was just a very limited...
Yeah, I wouldn't even say at my best necessarily, because it's, I think my best... I don't know. I think my best is when I'm like a little bit cynical, frankly.
Yeah.
But they saw me at my most positive. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, right? Like if I'm going to have people only see one side of me, definitely it would be better for them to see that than, like hungover Sunday Mattea, right? Like,
yeah.
If you have to pick sort of one very limited version. But it is kind of strange because it kind of forced me to rethink the way I saw my own personality. Like I definitely saw myself as like not a particular, and I would say I still see myself this way, not super outgoing, not somebody that necessarily brings a positive energy to the room. Not that I do the opposite of that, but that I'm
you're not a Debbie Downer.
No, not at all. But not that I would not describe myself as someone who lights up a room, for instance. But for people who watch me on television, that is what I was being told I was. And that I kind of was like, okay, maybe I am not giving myself enough credit for certain positive aspects of my personality that I don't always see in myself. Yeah.
It's a weird dynamic after you've been on TV, because I feel like there's the TV version of Mattea, super smart, on Jeopardy, cute anecdotes, positive. And then there's the version of you that's in real life. That's the same version that's with your family and your friends. So how do you reconcile the two? And even when people come up to you in the streets, do you feel like you need to give them the TV version?
I do feel a little bit like I need to give the TV energy, which is tough because you're just like not always able to do that. I think in terms of how I reconcile it, I will say I've been so lucky that, for lack of a better way to phrase it, my friends and family have been very normal about everything to do with Jeopardy. I know sometimes people like, I don't know to what extent this has happened to anyone I know personally, but I know from having read, for instance, like people who go on, reality competition type stuff, or even people who like do more conventional forms of media. So people who are actors or people who are musicians and then like sort of start to see success. Like sometimes people's close friends or their family don't always react well to it, or there's like tensions that start to arise. I really haven't experienced any of that. And I feel super, super lucky for that. So I think one thing that's been helpful is like, there's been no sense of like, I've forgotten who I am or anything to do with that, right? Because the second I think that I started to do that, like I would be told to get a grip like really fast.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important. In terms of like having to give people a certain energy, I think one thing that's helpful is like I have done other things now in the public, not anything nearly as big as Jeopardy, but like I have a podcast that's about politics. That's a very different vibe from seeing me on Jeopardy, right? Because it's like discussing serious issues. I'm interviewing people. I'm not giving too much of my own opinion, but it's just like a different side of me, right? So I don't feel like people have absolutely no reference point at all for the fact that I might be like a complex person who doesn't just like earn money and smile.
I mean, I wouldn't mind just being that person.
I would love to earn money and smile.
Life would be so great and simple.
Yeah, no, it'd be good. But, you know, there definitely have been times, not super often, there have been times where I've been like stopped in public where it's like, you know, like 1 a.m. in the airport or something, and you've just like had the worst day of your life, and then someone's like, "Are you the woman from Jeopardy?" And it's like, I can't talk to you right now.
Yeah,
You know, it does happen sometimes, and you feel bad because you never want to be the person where it's like, oh, like, and I like. This is the thing. I think it's especially embarrassing to be this person if you're like my tier of recognizable public figure. Like if an A-list celebrity is an asshole, it's like, of course they are, right? Like they live in completely a different world than the rest of us. I live in the regular world in my same apartment that I lived in when I was on Jeopardy. Like I can't be an asshole to anybody. Like I have not earned it at all. You know, you don't want to be the person where someone goes home and they're like, I had the worst encounter with that woman from Jeopardy, right?
Oh, I get it 100%. I actually had the same situation happen in the airport. It's late. Many flights have been canceled. Someone comes up to me and is like, you look so familiar. Have I seen you on TV or something? And I was just like, no, never been on TV. And I'm like, I'm sorry to whoever that person is. I would say hi to you now. But in that moment, I was just like, no, I don't have it.
It's just like not. Yeah, sometimes it's just not the moment. Like in my case, it was like I was coming home it was after my dad had died. Right. So it was literally like the day after. And I was like, I can't talk to this person. Like no. Like,
yeah.
I didn't even deny that it was me. I was just like, I can't talk to you right now. Like, just get me out of here. Like I need to go home. And that's, you know, that's just like, I don't know, that's life, right? Like in the same way that a person that you actually personally know is not always going to be like in the top mood to talk to you. Like that's also true if you recognize somebody, right? I do find it odd. So I don't know if this ever happens to you where people will just like not even really address you by name or like try and indicate where they might know you from, but they'll just be like, I know you. And I'm like, you quite literally do not know me though. You know who I am, perhaps. You recognize me. You do not know me. I do not know you personally. But I don't know. At the same time, it's like hard to be too bitter about people being just like so genuinely excited. Like I've not had people be rude to me in public because they didn't like me on television. It's always a positive thing. It's just something like I don't think there's a way to prepare yourself psychologically for having that happen to you all of a sudden.
Yeah, I totally hear you. Yeah, because everybody, if they're going to talk to you, they're excited and everyone is supportive. And obviously you've done something that is so impressive to them, but it's a very weird thing where it's not to say that it's like, okay, yeah, as you said, A-list celebrity, but it's like, oh, there's a level of always knowing that whenever you go out in public, someone is going to recognize you and you just have to accept that.
Yeah, or like it's like not even that it's going to necessarily happen every time, because certainly like if I'm in my neighborhood and like generally the people that are around in my neighborhood are people that have seen me around all the time, right? So anyone who, you know, wants to talk to me about Jeopardy has largely already gotten the chance to do so because they've run into me at the grocery store, or at the coffee shop or whatever. But it's sort of the knowledge of anytime you go out, you could run into somebody who you don't know personally, but who recognizes you. And, you know, like you just kind of think a little bit sometimes of like, I, you know, don't want, like, I'm somebody who I do love to not eavesdrop on purpose, but I do love when I hear like a juicy part of a conversation in public, right? Like one of the things I missed the most during COVID, I think, of going out was actually overhearing people's conversations. Because sometimes you just hear one sentence and it's like,
you're
fascinating,
in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that you're trying. It's just like, there's a break in the conversation that you're having and you hear from the table over somebody says something, knowing that, oh, that could not just be like something that someone overhears, but someone might hear something I say in public and like attach it to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't really enjoy that knowledge when I think about it too much.
Yeah, that's a very weird thing to wrap your head around. I completely relate. And I also know from your experience on Jeopardy, like something that got attached to how people see you is people talked about your sexuality, even though I know you didn't make any anecdotes about your sexuality. And I've heard that you've said you didn't go on Jeopardy to be the capital L lesbian. And then yet that still became part of your story. And I mean, that's you, that's authentic to you. But what was that like having something that's personal to you like that be part of the story?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the reason I didn't bring it up in any anecdotes was just because, Jeopardy's interesting in the sense of it's not a show where like everybody who goes on gets any amount of press coverage, like is going to be, dealing with investigations into their personal life, right? If you're on, even if you win a couple of games, but if it doesn't make the news outside of, say, your like local media market, your paper in your small city, wherever, you can be relatively anonymous having gone on Jeopardy. So in my mind, I was like, I want this to kind of pass by pretty quietly. Like, I'm not the sort of person who enjoys like, making a spectacle of myself, so to speak. Like, I'm always one for a small birthday party and that sort of thing. So I wasn't going to like post about being on Jeopardy a lot. Like, I was obviously going to tell my friends and family, but I wasn't going to make sure that like, my boss from 5 years ago's cousin's dog like knew about me being on the show. But then of course, I'm taping the show and I continue winning and I like realize this is going to be a news story. Like, I'm not going to be able to keep this kind of like among people that I'm close with. It is going to be something that attention is focused on. And that was kind of the point where I realized, okay, I'm not going to have any anecdotes that really talk about being gay. Also, because I don't really know what I would say about it exactly. Like, I was single at the time that I was on the show. So it's not like you can drop in like, oh, my girlfriend, blah, 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 right? Because that's an easy way to do it. I wasn't involved in any sort of like organization that would come up naturally. Like, I think the closest I got was I mentioned having gone to Drag Race Bar Trivia on a date once, which is like, would likely be something you would not do with a straight guy if you're going on a date.
Yeah.
And then like I mentioned that I took like gender and sexuality studies in university. So that was sort of the closest I got within the context of the show. But I did also know I had the experience growing up of sort of being identified as gay before coming out by people around me. I don't totally know what it was that was being picked up on. But it was something that was assumed about me even before I came out. And so I knew that there was going to be some speculation in some quarters, and some of that would be from queer people who are like, oh, there's somebody on this show that I see myself in, and they would want to celebrate that. Also, there would be people who would be like, wow, I like fucking dyke. Like, we don't like that.
Yeah.
Right. So,
no, we are not for those people.
No, exactly.
Those people can fuck off.
No, exactly. Right. It's like, whatever. Like, oh my God. And I will say, stop hating from outside the club. It's always like the worst people. And they've had so many opportunities to just be mad at seeing queer and trans people be successful on Jeopardy and like stay mad. We're gonna keep going on the show.
Yeah,
like, I don't know what to tell you. Anyhow, I knew that I was going to get those kinds of reactions also if I didn't say anything. So I was like, well, why, make this be something that people speculate about? Like, just own it. And, the sort of thing is that you can't totally control the narrative, like once it's out there as a fact that you've stated, right? So, people can sort of hold you up as a representative of the community if they want to. You can't always do anything about that. My sort of feeling about it was that I always wanted to be very clear, like, I am not trying to represent anyone other than myself. To the extent that I, do live up to certain stereotypes of like what lesbians and especially young lesbians are like. Sure, yeah, I think it's great that queer people were able to watch TV and be like, oh, you know what, this person reminds me of me. Like I could go on this show, or like this is something where, you know, I got some messages on Instagram that were like, oh, my mom, you know, kind of came around to talking with me about my sexuality because like she saw you on TV and saw that you were like successful in this and that, or like even just minor things like my mom finally stopped complaining about my nose piercing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I felt a little bit, and I think even more this way now than I did at the time that I was taping my initial run of episodes. As a gay person specifically, I think there's like a little bit of a sense of political responsibility of I'm going to be out, and even if I don't really talk about it very much, just saying like I'm a gay person and I'm going to engage in public life in this specific way is still something that has a lot of political power. I think especially now where we see things like in a bunch of provinces, you know, there's like an attempt at rolling back things like sex ed or things like teachers being able to affirm students' gender identities, that sort of thing. Like not to mention all of the like much harsher restrictions we've seen in the States. There is like, I think some value and power in just like saying, you know what, like you liked watching me on television, watching trivia questions, like also I'm gay. So deal with that. Make of that what you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much responsibility when you represent any group. And I think that it was quite healthy for you to just say, okay, I'm going to represent myself. And then if there's, you know, any other impact that comes from this, then that things will fall where they may.
Yeah. And I think the impact of it has been largely positive. One thing I will say that made it a lot easier for me was that I was not like the first successful queer person on Jeopardy, right? Because Amy, whose games were airing as I was getting ready to tape, you know, she's the most successful woman on the show. She's also queer and trans, right? So I didn't have to be like the one standard bearer. You know, that was something that she sort of had to do. Roan, who I'm now friends with, who beat Amy in her final game, also is a gay guy. So it's like there's kind of a couple of us that have been on the show in quick succession where it's like, okay, it's not like you are the gay person who's been on Jeopardy. It's a responsibility that's like at least a little bit distributed out. And I was not the person who had to kind of bear the bulk of that responsibility. So that did make it a lot easier for me. And I think shows like why it is important that people, you know, participate in public life as representatives of marginalized communities, because then it's just like, if you're that first person, you're making it that much easier for the second person. Second person makes it easier for the third person, and so on.
And then as it goes on, then it just doesn't matter in the best way. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't become like a thing that has to be discussed every time it happens. Yeah.
So I want to ask, I know there's a question that always comes up after people are on shows like this, where people will ask, what is next? I know I've gotten this question a lot. So when you get asked this question, what goes through your head?
My immediate answer most of the time is, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions?
Are you hiring? Do you need a very smart person?
I'm like, what do you think I should do? Yeah. So no, that's honestly my first response is always like, well, what do you think? I really, really don't know. And it's funny because I think if you had asked me at this time last year, say, am I, you know, what's next? I wouldn't have known then, but I would have assumed that by this point I would know.
Yeah.
You know, we're now a year and a half out from when my episodes were on television. And I kind of assumed that things would quiet down, and then things did not quiet down for a variety of reasons. One is that the sort of Jeopardy universe has expanded a little bit. And so there was Masters where I went back even after the Tournament of Champions and was competing. So that, you know, took up some more of my time, but then also gave me like even more of that sense of financial freedom of like, I don't have to go to an office job right away. I don't have to go back to school right away. Like I can just kind of coast and figure out what the next thing is going to be for me. So there's been that, you know, I've done some other media stuff. So there's my podcast, The Backbench, that I host. I did Canada Reads for the CBC. So that was like another kind of media thing. Got to talk about books, which was really exciting. And then there's like the odd speaking engagement here and there. So I've just been kind of like taking opportunities as they come across my desk with not any particular vision in mind of what comes next. And I think the thing that's nice about that is like, if I look around, like most of my close friends are people that I went to university with. So I would say the age range is roughly like 24 to 27. Um, and no one totally knows what they're doing. Like there are
Yeah.
some people that are settled in careers where it's like they're doing their articles, they're going to be a lawyer, and they're probably going to do that until they retire. But we don't know that for sure, right? A lot of people don't end up doing the career that they think they're going to do even after going to professional school. Like that's not the thing that they stick in. And so I think at some point I'll go back to school. I was going to go to law school before Jeopardy, and then I deferred and like didn't go because of it. So that's maybe something I'll do. I would maybe consider continuing to work in some kind of media journalism type thing. Um, but like at this point, my life has gone through just so many twists and turns, even before being on Jeopardy, frankly, but like especially in the, almost 2 years since I got that call inviting me to go on the show. It feels almost like a fool's errand to try and predict what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because like if you had asked me, so 2 years ago, I was working on my law school applications. I'd kind of just finished like a summer of doing a bunch of different odd jobs. Like I was working for the census. I had some sort of job. I was working at like an investor relations firm doing online events for them, like almost tech support, but like imagine tech support if you have no knowledge of how computers work. What else did I do? I did like phone surveys for I did all sorts of different things. And so I was like, okay, enough of this like bopping around doing different jobs. I'm going to be serious. I'm going to go be a lawyer. And then, early January of 2022, I get the call to go on Jeopardy and I'm still not in law school.
Yeah.
So there you are.
You're just not meant to do serious things, at least at this point. And
Yeah.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier in terms of how doing the Jeopardy test, going down for the finals, accepting the call to be on the show was just like, what's the worst that can happen? It's like being open and flexible to things has seemed to work out for you at this point. So why not keep doing that?
Yeah. And I think, I had I had a conversation with like someone that I work with at like, or not work with, my financial advisor at my bank. It was a couple months ago that was like she was not reading my mood very well during this conversation. So I like didn't respond well to it. Although I do think that what she was saying is not totally wrong. But basically she was like, while you're in your 20s, like I don't like own my home. I don't have to worry about home maintenance, right? I'm still a renter. I don't have like a settled career. I don't have kids. I don't have like a partner whose job and like other life stuff I have to worry about. Basically, the only things I need to be concerned about in terms of like major constraints on my decision making is like the members of my immediate family. And even that is a lot of people when they're 25 probably wouldn't care about it, but I've decided that I'm going to consider it pretty heavily in what I do. I can kind of screw around for a while and it would be okay. I am somebody who likes to keep busy and likes to be productive and likes to work. So, I'm not about to like just go on vacation for a year and like travel or whatever. I think I want to be doing something sort of productive with my time. But that could look like a lot of different things. And it has been nice, I will say, to have the flexibility to, if I want to go visit friends in the States or if I want to go home and like spend some time with my mom, I don't have to like worry about, well, what is the schedule of my school year going to allow or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can relate. People always ask me, oh, how did winning the money from Survivor change your life? And I always say the biggest thing is it gave me freedom and it gave me time because then and I think similar to you, we have this flexibility where we can try different media things. We can work on different projects. We can get up and go visit friends when we want to. And I think that that's like the beauty of coming into this money. Sure, yeah, you got to invest it, got to worry about the future, all of that fun stuff. But you've certainly earned the time and the freedom that you have now.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, I think I haven't really spent much of the money. Like people are always like, well, what did you, especially right after my first run on the show ended, there's this sort of assumption of like, I was going to go out and buy immediately like a nice car or something. I was like, well, why would I buy a car? No. Like, it's like throwing money in a hole.
My financial planner was like, do not buy a car.
No, they're also so expensive right now. Like everything, my mom recently retired from like her original career that she did. And she's like selling cars now. And like, I'm learning so much about cars. And what I've learned is I really don't want to own one.
Yeah.
Like not while I'm living in Toronto anyway. It just like doesn't make sense. So there's this sense of like people assume that the value of having money is like to buy things that improve your life in some way. And that's definitely nice. Like it is good to, maybe get some nicer stuff for my kitchen and not feel guilty about it, or not
Mhm.
worry about like, okay, well, I've made this purchase. Is it now going to come back and bite me if there's some sort of emergency that I need money for? Like, not having to worry about that is great. But I think really just, yeah, like the alleviation of the pressure
Mhm.
associated with hustling and, always like I was always working like 2 or 3 jobs from the time I was like 20 till, well, that's like a period of 3 years, like 20 to 23. It's not like a whole life of doing that.
Mhm.
But like for, most of my early adulthood, yeah, I guess probably started even earlier than that. Anyway, like the alleviation of that sense of financial pressure of always needing to find the next thing immediately, like that on its own,
Mhm.
absent any of the actual material things you can do with money, is like the best gift, I would say.
That's the thing. And I mean, it's not like it changes your life completely. We were just talking about taking the public transit today. So it's
Yeah.
like you can still see us on the streetcar,
Yeah.
but like don't be weird if you see us on the streetcar. But yeah, it's something really nice about relieving yourself from that ease and from that pressure.
hmm
So if people want to keep up with you and whatever you're doing now and whatever you do in the future, where can people follow you?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say in terms of my work, my podcast that I host is called The Backbench. It's on Canada Land Media. And so it's a federal politics focused show. If you are interested in Canadian federal politics, you should definitely give it a listen. If you're not interested in Canadian federal politics, you should be. And this is hopefully the show that will convince you why you should care. And in terms of just like what I'm up to, you can follow me at Mattea Roach on Twitter and on Instagram.
Amazing. I actually used to be a Patreon subscriber of Canada Land
nice.
back in the day, back when I had a job.
Mhm.
So I have to look into that because I quit my job before Survivor.
Yeah.
And also I had a friend with a special question for you. How does one recruit you for their trivia team?
You don't. I won't come. I'm sorry.
Fair. You only do high stakes televised trivia.
It's truly, it's like that Linda Evangelista, like I only get out of bed for $10,000.
Yeah.
No, the actual reason is because of the vibes. I will go to bar trivia if I'm not in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually kind of like a fun behind the scenes, whatever. I feel like I've alluded to this through a conversation. But one of the best things about Jeopardy, besides like the financial security of it all, is you become friends with the people that you play against oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I've gone to like New York, I guess was the one trivia that I went to that was in a different city, or, when I've been in LA for taping, like often a big group of us will go out and then it's like, okay, we've all been on TV doing trivia. Like this is, a fun, good vibe. Oftentimes in larger US cities, there'll be bar trivia nights that are run by people that have been on the show. And so it's kind of like a nice community, like alum group. But in Toronto, I never went to bar trivia before Jeopardy. So I was like, I'm not going to start now.
Yeah, no. Unless Mattea is competing against Ken Jennings, no trivia.
Yeah, sorry.
Mattea, thank you so much for being on the show, and I can't wait to see whatever it is you do next.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mattea, for being part of Happy to See Me. I always love speaking to a fellow winner to understand how the whole TV and winning experience affected them. I know that Mattea is going to go on and do amazing things, and I can't wait to see what happens next. So thank you for being part of the pod. Now it's time for me to answer a listener question, and this one I thought about a lot. The question is, what is the best piece of advice you've received? I'll admit, I love advice. I have more than my share of self-help books. I have a few Brené Brown books on the shelf. And it was really hard for me to figure out what the best piece of advice is, because I find that advice resonates with me depending on the stage of life I'm at. And there's a piece of advice I got recently that is resonating with where I'm at right now. So that's what I'll share with you today. Recently, I had a friend remind me that you have chosen the hardest path. And that's not to say my friend is judging me saying you are taking on too much of a challenge, but rather it was a reminder that was much needed. It was a reminder that things are not meant to feel easy right now, and that's okay. I talked to a psychologist recently about how my life has changed so much over the last few years. Yes, it's amazing. One survivor, get to live out that former reality TV star life, whatever that means. But I also made a lot of personal changes too. I left a career that I spent my whole life working towards. And I let go of so many expectations of myself and things that I believe defined me. I made a lot of personal changes and personal discoveries. And plus, there are things I want to build for myself in terms of my career, but I don't have that blueprint in front of me with the exact life that I picture for myself. In fact, I'm always discovering new things about myself that the vision of my life is always changing, which I think is pretty awesome. And it sucks wondering if things are going according to plan. It sucks wondering if you are good enough to move forward in this path you've chosen for yourself. It sucks being misunderstood sometimes. I still, to this day, I'm telling you, I still get messages from people who are wondering why I did or didn't do certain things after winning Survivor because everybody else does them. And it can be lonely. Right now, I find a lot of the friends that I spend a lot of time with, they're people who have made changes in their lives and they've been pursuing creative or entrepreneurial passions. And a lot of us are in the same stage where right now, it feels like a lot of things suck. It feels like there's a lot that is unstable. It's really easy to question whether or not you are good enough to make your dreams or ambitions come true. Or there are a lot of people that I spend time with right now who know that they want to be doing something and they can't quite put their finger on it. And I want to give them the same advice that you have chosen the hardest path. It's okay if it doesn't feel easy. And I don't think this just applies to entrepreneurship or career stuff. This applies to anybody who is trying to bring something into the world or someone who is making a decision for themselves and choosing a path regardless of whether they have seen a precedent in their life telling them that it's probably going to work out. And I know that if you're in this boat, it can be scary because this path can present you with things that might be scary. It can present you with things that you're worried you're not prepared for. And I want to tell you, you should be proud of yourself for taking the hardest path because it means that you are brave. It means that you are choosing to live authentically. And it means that you are choosing to put yourself out there to get the most meaningful fulfillment at the end of the day. And how you define fulfillment is completely up to you. So at the end of the day, choosing the hardest path, it's badass. So if you're out there on the hard path, you are a badass. I am cheering you on. I hope you know that I have days where things don't feel easy and you have days where things don't feel easy, but we are on this path together. So whether you're just starting out or you are further along on the path, you are a badass. So I'm so grateful to my friend for reminding me of this. And I'm also so grateful to the listener for submitting this question. I truly love getting questions from you all and seeing what you're interested in hearing about. So send me any questions you have and I'll try to answer them in a future episode. But for now, I want to thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Instagram and on YouTube. It's at Happy to See Me Pod. Thank you for spending time with me this week, and I will be happy to see you next Monday.